In 1981, rising Hollywood star Clara Vance vanished without a trace, on the eve of exposing a dark secret within the industry. For over 2 decades, her disappearance remained an unsolved mystery until a violent landslide unearthed her buried car, and a chilling trail of evidence would send shockwaves through the film world and change one detective's life forever. In 1981, Clara Vance was the darling of Hollywood North, a rising star whose name graced magazine covers and marquees across Canada and beyond. At just 29, she had already captured the hearts of millions with her commanding screen presence and disarming vulnerability. On the crisp autumn evening of October 15th, she arrived at the lavish premiere of her latest film, Frost and Fire, held at the prestigious Imperial Theatre in downtown Vancouver. The air outside shimmered with the flash of paparazzi bulbs, the scent of designer perfume mingling with the cool Pacific breeze. Clara, draped in an elegant crimson gown, smiled gracefully as she navigated the throng of reporters. She waved, posed, and exchanged pleasantries with fans and industry titans alike. But beneath her composed exterior, a subtle tension radiated from her deep blue eyes. There was something different about her that night, an urgency, perhaps even fear, lurking behind her signature poise. Her closest confidant, Elise Grant, had noticed it earlier that afternoon. "You okay, hun?" Elise had asked, dabbing powder along Clara's high cheekbones in her hotel suite. Clara had hesitated, glancing toward the door as though afraid someone might overhear. "I'm fine." Yet her fingers trembled slightly as she applied her lipstick, and Elise caught a glimpse of a folded envelope sticking out of Clara's handbag, marked, "To be opened if I disappear." The makeup artist's gut twisted, but she knew better than to press Clara on such matters. Not tonight, not with so many eyes watching. The premiere unfolded as expected, standing ovations, glowing reviews, and celebratory champagne flowing into the small hours. Clara seemed to relax, laughing with castmates and producers as the party spilled from the theater into the adjacent rooftop lounge. It was after midnight when she excused herself, claiming she needed some air. She slipped away alone, down a dim side staircase, red heels clicking softly on the worn stone steps. That was the last confirmed sighting of Clara Vance. In the days that followed, a frantic search began. Elise reported Clara missing the next morning when she failed to show for a scheduled magazine shoot. Calls to Clara's suite went unanswered. The hotel staff insisted no one had seen her leave. Her Jaguar XJS convertible remained untouched in the garage. Vancouver PD launched a high-profile investigation, combing through surveillance footage, interviewing dozens of witnesses, and sweeping Clara's apartment for clues. But there was no trace, no credit card activity, no phone calls, no sightings. The city buzzed with speculation. These were like wildfire across tabloids. Had Clara overdosed? Had she run off with a secret lover? Was she the victim of foul play? Detective Colin Marchant, then head of the Major Crimes Unit, publicly assured the press that every lead was being pursued. Privately, he confided to his team that the case felt eerily professional, as though someone had erased her. Weeks turned to months, and the media frenzy gradually waned. By spring 1982, Clara's disappearance had been declared a cold case. Her devoted fans held vigils and circulated missing posters, but the trail remained stubbornly cold. Then came the rumors. In 1984, a British tabloid published a dubious report claiming Clara had been spotted in Ibiza under a false name. Another paper suggested she had joined a religious cult in Oregon. Each tip proved baseless. Meanwhile, Clara's parents, heartbroken and aging, passed away within a year of each other, never knowing what had become of their daughter. Elise Grant never gave up hope, keeping a faded photo of Clara taped above her vanity mirror. The years stretched on. Vancouver changed. Its skyline rose with sleek towers, and new stars graced the screens. By 2004, Clara Vance had become a tragic footnote in entertainment history, a cautionary tale whispered among young actresses. Until fate intervened. In March 2004, an unusually harsh sufficient storm battered British Columbia, unleashing torrential rain across the province. The rains triggered a massive landslide along the remote Lionsgate Pass, a scenic but treacherous mountain route frequented by tourists and filmmakers. At dawn, emergency crews were dispatched to clear the debris that had buried a portion of the road. Among them was backhoe operator Martin Varga, a stoic man with 20 years of experience moving earth and rock. As Martin maneuvered his machine through the mudslide's wreckage, the bucket struck something hard beneath the sludge. He eased back, curious. Switching to hand tools, he and two crew members began digging carefully around the object. A glint of faded crimson paint emerged, then the contoured shape of a car's frame. Gasps rippled through the workers as they unearthed the unmistakable curves of a vintage Jaguar XJ, its nose driven deep into the earth, body partially crushed but still recognizable. The license plates were missing, long corroded by time, but a partial VIN was soon recovered. Then came the chilling discovery. As workers continued clearing debris, one of them noticed a thin, pale protrusion near the car's front bumper. At first mistaken for a branch, closer inspection revealed it to be a human forearm, skeletal and wrapped in tattered red silk. The site was immediately sealed, and Vancouver PD was summoned. For the first time in over 2 decades, Clara Vance's name blazed across headlines once more. The public was riveted. Had the missing starlet finally been found? Was this the long-overdue answer to one of Canada's greatest unsolved mysteries? The case was assigned to Detective Rebecca Tran, a rising star within the force's Major Crimes Division. At 32, Rebecca was known for her sharp instincts and relentless drive, qualities that would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Standing amid the mud and wreckage at Lionsgate Pass, Rebecca gazed at the crushed Jaguar, her mind racing. It was no accident, the position of the car, the missing plates, the deliberate burial. Someone had wanted Clara Vance to vanish without a trace. But time and nature had conspired to reveal the secret they thought they had buried forever. As forensic teams began the painstaking process of exhuming the vehicle and its grisly contents, Rebecca made a silent vow. She would find out what happened to Clara Vance, and she would not stop until every truth was brought to light. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the low-hanging mist that had settled over Lionsgate Pass, casting a muted glow across the wreckage below. Emergency crews and forensic specialists swarmed the site, their boots sinking into the sodden earth. A perimeter had been hastily established with caution tape, and news helicopters now buzzed overhead, eager to capture footage of the unfolding scene. The battered red Jaguar XJ, its once sleek frame now scarred and corroded, lay partially exposed at the edge of the landslide. Its nose was driven steeply into the hillside, as though forced downward by an unseen hand. The roof was crumpled, the windows long shattered, and no visible tire tracks led to its final resting place. It had not skidded off the road. It had been buried deliberately. Martin Varga, the backhoe operator who had first uncovered the vehicle, stood nearby with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His expression was pale, drawn. "It looked wrong," he murmured to one of the responding officers, "like someone wanted it to disappear. You don't find cars like that in a landslide unless they were already under the ground." His voice trembled as he recounted the next discovery. While clearing the remaining debris around the car's front end, one of the workers had spotted an irregular shape jutting from the mud, a pale, slender form wrapped in decayed red silk. At first, they'd thought it might be a remnant of the car's interior, perhaps a seatbelt or a piece of upholstery, but as they carefully brushed away the dirt with gloved hands, the grim reality had become undeniable. It was a human forearm, skeletal fingers curled inward, the bones encased in the remains of an elegant red silk nightgown. Word of the discovery spread rapidly. Within an hour, Vancouver PD's Major Crimes Division had been alerted. Detective Rebecca Tran received the call at precisely 7:34 a.m. as she sipped her first coffee of the day in her sparsely decorated office. She had only recently been promoted to division chief, a rare achievement for someone just 32, and many of her colleagues still regarded her with a mix of admiration and skepticism. But if anyone doubted her ability, they never voiced it aloud. Rebecca had earned her stripes through sheer tenacity, an unflinching dedication to the truth, and a keen instinct for cases others deemed unsolvable. The name Clara Vance was not unfamiliar to her. As a child growing up in Vancouver, Rebecca had heard her mother speak of the glamorous actress who had vanished without a trace. Posters bearing Clara's face had adorned lampposts in the store windows for years after the disappearance. Even as the case faded from public memory, it remained one of the city's most haunting mysteries, a story of beauty and talent lost to the shadows. Now, it seemed, the shadows had begun to lift. Rebecca arrived at Lionsgate Pass just before noon, weaving her unmarked SUV through a gauntlet of news vans and curious onlookers. Clad in a crisp black suit and armed with a battered leather notebook, she ducked beneath the caution tape and surveyed the scene. Forensics teams were working meticulously around the car, their movements deliberate and precise. A portable canopy had been erected to shield the exposed remains from the elements. Detective Tran greeted Sergeant Paul Kim, one of her most trusted field officers. He handed her a pair of gloves and motioned toward the site. "We've got partial human remains, one forearm, some fabric remnants, and what looks like fragments of a rib cage deeper in the mud. The car was buried nose down, no sign of a crash path, no plates, but we pulled a partial VIN from the chassis. It matches a 1980 Jaguar XJ." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "Have we confirmed the identity of the remains?" she asked, her voice steady. "Not yet," Paul replied. "We've sent bone samples and hair to the lab. Preliminary dental comparison is pending, but—" He hesitated, glancing toward the red silk nightgown. "That gown matches what she was last reported wearing the night she disappeared." Elise Grant, the makeup artist, mentioned it in her original statement. Rebecca approached the vehicle, crouching beside the forensic techs as they photographed and cataloged each artifact. The skeletal arm, though fragile, still bore the remnants of a gold bracelet near the wrist, a delicate piece that matched one Clara had often been photographed wearing. Rebecca noted the positioning of the car and the body fragments. The Jaguar's windshield was clouded with grime, its hood crushed inward. There were no signs of blood spatter or forced entry, suggesting that Clara had likely already been dead or incapacitated when the car was buried. "This wasn't an accident," Rebecca said quietly, almost to herself. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to make her disappear." By late afternoon, the remains had been carefully extracted and transported to the city morgue under armed escort. The media had already begun speculating wildly about the identity of the victim, though no official statement had yet been released. Rebecca returned to headquarters, determined to stay ahead of the press frenzy. In the sterile confines of the forensics lab, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Nadia Malik greeted her with a weary smile. "We rushed the DNA analysis," Natty said, leading Rebecca to a computer terminal. "Bone marrow samples from the humerus were viable. We compared them to genetic material archived from Clara's personal effects, an old hairbrush provided by her estate." She clicked through a series of screens before displaying the final report. "It's a match," Nadia confirmed. 99.9% certainty. The remains are Clara Vance's." Rebecca exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of the confirmation. After 23 years, the mystery of Clara Vance's disappearances had resurfaced with chilling clarity. But this was no time for reflection. There were deeper questions to answer. Who had buried her? Why had they done it? And most importantly, what secrets might still lie hidden beneath the surface this long-forgotten crime? As Rebecca prepared to brief her team, her mind raced with possibilities. The investigation was no longer a cold case. It was a homicide, one with powerful forces that might still be lurking in the shadows, desperate to keep the truth buried. The confirmation that the remains belonged to Clara Vance had barely begun to ripple through the department when the forensic team unearthed the next clue. Rebecca Tran, pacing the sterile confines of the lab, glanced up as Dr. Nadia Malik re-entered the room, a sealed evidence bag in her gloved hands. "Detective Tran," Nadia began, her voice clipped with purpose. "We've found something inside the remains of the nightgown." She carefully placed the bag on the examination table beneath a bright overhead light. Inside, a single strand of hair gleamed faintly against the clear plastic. Rebecca leaned closer, her sharp gaze narrowing. The strand was dark, medium length, and intact with its follicle root, perfect for DNA analysis. "It wasn't hers?" Rebecca asked, though her gut already whispered the answer. Nadia shook her head. "No, the strand is too thick, too coarse for female hair. It's most likely male. I've already sent it for mitochondrial sequencing." "Could it be from a first responder? An old contamination?" Rebecca pressed. Nadia's lips pursed. "Unlikely. This hair was lodged between the inner fold of the red silk, near where the remains of her ribcage were recovered. It's been there for a long time." Rebecca absorbed this in silence. The presence of a man's hair, hidden so deeply within Clara's final shroud, suggested close contact, possibly during or after death. She scribbled a quick note in her leather-bound journal, circling the words, "Unknown male DNA possible suspect." With this new development, the case had transformed once again. Now it wasn't simply about confirming Clara's fate, it was about tracing the web of individuals who had helped orchestrate her disappearance and burial. Later that afternoon, Rebecca returned to Lionsgate Pass, where the forensic field team continued to excavate around the battered Jaguar. The scene was a flurry of controlled chaos, photographers cataloging every exposed surface, specialists scanning for trace evidence, and officers maintaining the perimeter against increasingly aggressive media crews. Sergeant Paul Kim approached her, clipboard in hand. "Detective, you should see this," he said, leading her toward the car's undercarriage. Two forensic techs were crouched beside the exposed driver's side frame, their gloved fingers carefully extracting a stubborn object embedded near the wheel well. The object, once freed, was revealed to be a torn fragment of weathered canvas, its edges frayed, its dark green color faded nearly to gray. Paul passed it to Rebecca inside a fresh evidence bag. "We found this jammed between the frame and the chassis, partially fused to the metal from long absence. And first we thought it was just old debris, but look at this." He gestured toward the tech's laptop, where magnified images of the canvas revealed faint, linear indentations across its surface. Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she studied the marks. "Rebecca's Earths," murmured, ecstatic. "This is consistent with being wrapped around something under tension." "Exactly," Paul confirmed. "And the position where we found it? Well, it's odd. The only way this fabric could have ended up wedged that deep into the frame is if the car was dragged." Rebecca straightened, her pulse quickening. Dragged up or dragged down? Of the techs ran the geometry. The marks on the undercarriage, combined with the slope of the hill, suggest the Jaguar wasn't driven into that position. It was pulled backward, nose down, likely with a winch or heavy-duty towing equipment. We also found faint gouges in the old bedrock beneath the wheels, consistent with steel cable tension. Rebecca exhaled slowly, the implications settling in. Someone had staged this scene. Clara's body hadn't simply vanished, it had been entombed with deliberate care, the car meticulously positioned to erase any trace of human intervention. This wasn't a panicked crime of opportunity, it was calculated. As the light began to fade across the pass, Rebecca summoned her team for an impromptu briefing. "Here's what we know so far," she began, her voice firm beneath the whine of passing helicopters. "Clara Vance's remains were found inside her Jaguar, which was deliberately buried at this site. The presence of an unknown male hair within her nightgown suggests close physical contact with her after death. We've recovered a fragment of aged canvas, likely part of a tarp or towing assembly, indicating the vehicle was dragged into place, not driven." She met the eyes of each officer in turn. This was no accident. Whoever did this had access to equipment, knowledge of the terrain, and time to execute the burial without witnesses. Our priority now is to trace that canvas. We need to identify the towing method and whoever might have supplied or operated it. Paul added, "We're also cross-referencing towing records from the early 80s. If this involved professional equipment, someone may have kept receipts or maintenance logs." Rebecca nodded, her mind racing ahead. "Good, and start building a list of individuals connected to Clara in her final weeks, crew members, personal acquaintances, anyone with motive and access to Justin. The hair sample analysis should give us a DNA profile soon. When it does, I want it cross-referenced against every suspect we generate." As the team dispersed to their respective tasks, Rebecca lingered near the partially unearthed Jaguar, its once luxurious frame now a battered relic of a long-buried crime. The scent of damp earth mingled with the faint metallic tang of old rust, grounding her in the gravity of the moment. She pulled out her notebook once more and underlined 3 words in bold strokes: "Not an accident." Her instinct screamed that this case would reach further than anyone expected. It would touch old power structures, expose long-buried secrets, and if the strands of that unknown hair belonged to who she suspected, then the ripples would not end here. Somewhere out there, the person who had buried Clara Vance beneath this mountain still walked free. Perhaps they believed their crime had faded with time, lost to history. But the mountain had given up its secret. Now it was Rebecca Tran's turn to uncover the rest. She snapped her notebook shut and turned to Sergeant Kim. "Get me a list of industrial equipment suppliers active in Vancouver in 1981, and find out who owned property near this pass back then. Someone had to stage this. Someone had to know the terrain." Paul nodded, already pulling out his phone. The investigation was accelerating, the trail warming despite the decades gone by, and with each new layer peeled back, Rebecca felt herself drawn deeper into Clara Vance's world, a world where fame and glamour had masked darker undercurrents that were only now beginning to surface. Rebecca Trance sat in her office late into the night, the dim light of her desk lamp casting elongated shadows across the wall. The evidence board behind her had already begun to resemble a spider's web. Photos of Clara Vance, stills of the Jaguar buried in the hillside, crime scene images, and hastily scrawled notes connected by strands of red string. In the center, beneath Clara's iconic headshot, Rebecca had pinned a single word in bold black letters. Why? The unknown male hair, the canvas scrap, the methodical staging of the burial, all pointed to a deliberate effort to erase Clara from existence. Yet the deeper question remained. What had motivated such an elaborate crime? Why had someone gone to such lengths to silence her? The next morning, as Vancouver's downtown began to stir beneath a steel-gray sky, Rebecca received a call that promised a new lead. The voice on the other end was gravelly but deliberate. "Detective Tran? Name's Leonard Fong. I used to write for the entertainment beat back in the day. I followed Clara's career real close. Heard about the car they found? If you're serious about finding out what happened, we should talk." Rebecca knew the name. Leonard Fong was a legend among the city's old-school journalism, a man whose investigative instincts had once exposed corruption at the highest levels of the local government. His columns about the city's glitzy film scene in the late 70s and early 80s had been both celebrated and feared. Now retired and 74, he still commanded respect in certain circles. They arranged to meet at a quiet diner in Kitsilano, a place Leonard frequented since its heyday as a haunt for journalists and off-duty cops. Rebecca arrived early, sliding into a warm leather booth beneath faded black and white photos of movie stars from a bygone era. Minutes later, Leonard entered, leaning heavily on a cane, but moving with surprising determination. His eyes, sharp beneath bushy white brows, met hers with a knowing glint. After ordering coffee, Leonard leaned forward, voice low. "I followed every inch of Clara Vance's story. Still burns me how it ended. Or didn't until now." He pulled a battered leather notebook from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. "What I'm about to tell you never made it into print. Back then, you didn't write stories that crossed certain people." Rebecca studied him carefully. "What kind of people?" Leonard's gaze hardened. "Studio heads, financiers, directors with more power than sense, the kind of men who built entire careers by turning young actresses into commodities." He opened the notebook, flipping to a yellowed page. The months before Clara disappeared, she was restless. You could see it in her interviews, in the way she carried herself. She wasn't playing the game anymore. "I got word through one of my contacts that Clara had stumbled onto something big, a prostitution ring operating out of one of the major studios. Not street-level stuff, favors. They were flown to private parties, tested for roles. If they didn't play along, they were blackballed. Simple as that," Hagen added. "And Clara?" "She was going to expose it," Leonard said flatly. "She had names, photos, financial records, enough to bring down some very powerful men." He tapped the notebook. "I had an off-the-record chat with her 3 weeks before she vanished. She told me she was tired of living in fear, tired of pretending. She wanted out of the studio system, out of the lies. She said if she didn't go public, she'd never be free." Rebecca leaned in. "Did she say why then? Why risk everything at that point?" Lena hesitated, fingers drumming against the mug. "She didn't tell me outright, but there was something different about her. Softer maybe. Protective. Like she wasn't just thinking about herself anymore." He pulled a faded photograph from the notebook, sliding it across the table. Rebecca recognized Clara instantly, radiant even in a candid shot, seated at a cafe table with a protective hand resting on her stomach. "She was pregnant," Leonard said quietly. "I didn't print that either. Would have destroyed her career overnight. But I saw it. And when I asked, she didn't deny it. Rebecca's pulse quickened. "Do you know who the father was?" Leonard exhaled slowly. "That's where it gets tricky. There were rumors, of course. She'd been linked to a few powerful men, one director in particular, Victor Braxton. Back then he was the golden boy of Lionheart Studios, but he was also connected to the same inner circle that ran that prostitution ring." Rebecca scribbled notes furiously. "Did Clara ever mention him by name in connection with what she found?" "She was careful," Leonard replied. "Too careful. But she did say this: the man who thinks he made me is the same man who'll try to destroy me if I speak." He shook his head. "At the time, I thought it was metaphor. Now, maybe not." Rebecca sat back, heart pounding. Clara Vance had been more than a victim of circumstance. She had been a threat, a pregnant woman prepared to blow the whistle on a systemic abuse network. Her determination to escape that world had made her dangerous to the men who profited from it. Leonard sipped his coffee, eyes haunted. "You dig deep enough, you'll find they tried to bury more than her body. They buried the truth." Rebecca looked him dead in the eye. Not anymore. She gathered her notes, mind racing with the implications. If Clara had indeed collected evidence, it might still exist, hidden, waiting to be found. And if Victor Braxton had been involved, he had both motive and means to ensure Clara was silenced. But what if there were others? What if the web extended further than anyone imagined? As she rose to leave, Leonard gripped her wrist gently. "Be careful, detective. Some ghosts don't like to be disturbed." Rebecca nodded grimly. She fully intended to disturb them. Rebecca Tran returned to headquarters with her mind ablaze. The revelations from Leonard Fong had shifted the entire scope of the investigation. Clara Vance had not simply vanished because of a random act of violence or a private mental breakdown. She had been silenced at the very moment she was preparing to expose a secret that could have destroyed powerful men, one of whom was now rising unmistakably to the top of Rebecca's suspect list, Victor Braxton. By the time Rebecca entered the evidence room, her team had already begun compiling a timeline of Clara's last known activities, cross-referencing them with the inner circles of Lionheart Studios. Sergeant Paul Kim met her at the door with an eager expression. "You're going to want to see this," he said, leading her to a table spread with a dozen manila folders and high-resolution scans of vintage photographs. One image caught Rebecca's eye immediately. She reached out and drew it closer, heart thudding. It was a black-and-white publicity still, taken at a private gala held in early September 1981, less than 6 weeks before Clara's disappearances. Claire sat elegantly at a small round table, her arm resting lightly on the shoulder of none other than Victor Braxton. Victor, then a charismatic young director at the height of his fame, gazed at her with an expression that seemed both possessive and amused. Clara, in contrast, wore a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. The image was striking, not only for its intimacy, but also because it had not been part of the official press releases from the event. "Where did this come from?" Rebecca asked sharply. Paul tapped the corner of the print. "This was buried in the personal collection of one of the studio's former photographers, a guy named Harold Chung. He passed away a few years ago, but his estate was just donated to the Vancouver Film Archive. We were combing through the lot this morning when this popped up." Rebecca leaned in, examining the fine details. A champagne glass tilted slightly in Clara's hand, the faint outline of a small notebook peeking from her evening clutch. Victor's fingers curled possessively around the back of her chair. The composition was candid, too casual for a staged publicity shot. "They were closer than they wanted the public to believe," Rebecca murmured. Paul nodded grimly. Leonard Fong wasn't exaggerating. The rumors about them weren't just gossip. Rebecca snapped a photograph of the image with her phone, already considering the implications. If Clara had been carrying evidence with her that night, that notebook might have been part of it. And if Victor had known about her intent to go public, the stakes would have skyrocketed. Turning back to her team, Rebecca issued new instructions. "We need Victor Braxton's financials, past and present. Pull every record we can access legally. Focus especially on the weeks before and after October 15, 1981. If he moved money around, we need to know." Paul and the tech sprang into action. Hours later, under the flickering fluorescent lights of the conference room, they had result. Rebecca sat at the head of the table, eyes scanning a spreadsheet displayed on the projector screen. A forensic accountant had compiled the data into a conspiringly complex, multiple holding companies, offshore interests, and layers of legal obfuscation. But even through the smoke and mirrors, one transaction stood out like a beacon. On October 18, 1981, 3 days after Clara's disappearance, a sum of 50,000 Canadian dollars had been withdrawn in cash from one of Victor's private accounts. The withdrawal had been masked as an operation expense routed through a shell company affiliated with Lionheart Studios production services. Rebecca's gaze sharpened. $50,000. In cash. 3 days after she vanished, she said aloud, her voice tight. Paul chimed in. It gets better. The account this was routed through hadn't been touched in nearly 6 months before this withdrawal, and after that, it stayed inactive for another full year. Rebecca leaned forward. Who signed off on the withdrawal? Victor himself. His signature matches the banking records on file, Paul confirmed. A hush settled over the room as the team observed the significance. In the pre-digital era of 1981, cash withdrawals of that magnitude were rare and almost always reserved for transactions where discretion was paramount. Rebecca tapped her pen against the edge of the table. He paid someone off, or he paid for something, equipment, services. Possibly the towing and burial, Paul added. We're running checks on companies that might have provided towing services under the radar back then. A job like that wouldn't have gone through official channels. Rebecca's connection to Clara was undeniable, his motive increasingly clear. His opportunity now supported by a paper trail, but what lingered was the question of whether he had acted alone. The scale of the operation suggested coordination, complicity, others who had assisted in staging Clara's disappearance. She stood abruptly. I want everything we can find on Victor's known associates in 1981, his inner circle, assistants, production staff, even drivers. Anyone who might have helped him move a car and a body to Lionsgate Pass. As the team dispersed to tackle the next wave of leads, Rebecca remained at the frozen image of Clara and Victor. The photograph now seemed to hum with a sinister undercurrent. Clara had looked wary that night, aware, perhaps, of the storm gathering around her. Had she sensed that the man beside her might one day ensure she never spoke out? Or had she trusted him until it was too late? Rebecca's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Dr. Nadia Malik from the forensics lab. Detective Tran, the DNA sequencing on the hair came back, she said, her voice low. No match in the national database, but I think you'll want to come down here in person. Rebecca grabbed her jacket, adrenaline surging once more. The puzzle pieces were beginning to align, but with every answer came a deeper layer of the mystery. The hunt for the truth behind Clara Vance's disappearances was accelerating, and the shadows surrounding Victor Braxton were growing darker by the hour. Rebecca Tran's heels clicked sharply against the linoleum as she strode into the forensics lab. The urgency in Dr. Nadia Malik's voice still echoed in her mind. As she entered the sterile room, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed louder than usual. Nadia was waiting by the workstation, her eyes shadowed with fatigue and something else, an edge of concern. Without a word, she handed Rebecca a printed report. Rebecca scanned it quickly. The unknown male hair retrieved from Clara's nightgown had yielded a partial mitochondrial DNA sequence. There was no direct match in the national database, but the profile carried markers that suggested the donor might belong to a specific familiar Lynn industry. Nadia spoke softly. It's not definitive, but one of the closest familial matches we've seen belongs to someone with the surname Braxton. Rebecca's grip tightened on the paper. Victor. The net was tightening around him, yet just as one answer crystallized, the phone in her jacket pocket began to vibrate. Frowning, Rebecca stepped into the hall and answered. Detective Tran, she said, her tone brisk. The voice on the other end was low, distorted, untraceable. You're digging where you shouldn't, the caller said. Turn back. If you value your family, you'll walk away from this case. Rebecca's breath caught, but she forced her tone to remain icy. Who is this? The voice ignored her. Do you want your grandmother's face splashed across every paper in the city? Photos, stories, lies? It can happen. One more step and you'll regret it. Click. The line went dead. Rebecca stared at her phone, heart pounding. The threat was unmistakable. Her mind raced. Only a handful of people knew about her involvement in this case at this level of detail, and fewer still would dare to target her family. Whoever this was, they were connected and desperate. She returned to the lab, masking her tension. "Nadia, thank you. Keep the report secure, no leaks. I'll handle the rest." Nadia nodded solemnly. Back in her office, Rebecca sat alone in the dim light, replaying the call in her mind. The threat had not been random. Someone was watching her movements and knew her personal line. She opened a secure line to Sergeant Paul Kim. "Paul, I need a protection detail on my grandmother's house. Quiet. No uniforms, just eyes." Paul, hearing the edge in her voice, didn't question her. "Understood. I'll handle it." By the time evening fell over Vancouver, a discreet surveillance car was stationed a block away from the quaint two-story house where Rebecca's grandmother, May Tran, lived. May, now in her early 80s, remained fiercely independent, though Rebecca visited as often as her schedule allowed. Rebecca debated calling to warn her, though absolutely necessary. May had survived worse during her lifetime. Rebecca would not let this new shadow touch her. But fate had other plans. Shortly after midnight, Rebecca was jolted awake by the shrill ring of her phone. It was Paul. "Rebecca, we've got a problem." Adrenaline surged as she sat upright. "What happened?" "Your grandmother's house was hit. The surveillance team was temporarily pulled when one of the officers had a family emergency. During that gap, someone got inside." Rebecca was already grabbing her keys. "Is she okay?" "She wasn't home, thank God. Out with friends. But you need to see this yourself." The drive felt endless, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. When she arrived, the front door of her grandmother's house stood slightly ajar, police tape fluttering in the cold wind. Inside, officers moved quietly, documenting the scene. The air was thick with the faint scent of cigarette smoke, an intrusion that felt both calculated and personal. Paul met her in the foyer. No signs of forced entry. Whoever did this had skill. They knew the window of opportunity. Rebecca's gaze swept the living room, where books lay scattered and drawers had been methodically rifled through. But it was the mantelpiece that drew her attention and stopped her cold. At the center of the display was a cherished family photograph, a black-and-white image of Clara Vance with her parents, taken during Clara's early rise to fame. Rebecca's grandmother had kept it framed for decades, a silent tribute to her lost niece. Now, across the glass surface of the frame, a single deep gouge had been carved, angled, deliberate, and unmistakably fresh. It split across Clara's face like a jagged scar. Rebecca's stomach twisted. This was no random burglary. It was a message. Paul spoke quietly beside her. "We dusted for prints. Nothing usable, no traceable fibers. But this," he gestured to the marred photograph, "this was intentional." Rebecca's jaw clenched. The threat from the call had not been empty. Someone had escalated from words to action, and they had chosen this method to send a message directly to her heart. She turned to Paul, her voice steel. "Double the surveillance on her house, no gaps, and get me everything you can find on Victor's known enforcers, fixers, anyone with the skill to pull this off without leaving a trace." Paul nodded grimly. Already in motion, Rebecca remained in the house long after the officers had cleared out, standing alone before the defaced photograph. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the cracked glass, overlaid with Claire's damaged image. They wanted her to stop. They wanted her afraid, but all they had done was light a fire. She would not stop now. Rebecca Tran barely slept that night. The intrusion at her grandmother's house had sent her adrenaline surging, her mind unable to settle. She kept seeing the claw mark across Clara's photo, a crude violation that told her plainly someone was watching. Someone who still feared the truth. The morning air was brittle with cold as she sat in her office, sifting through new intelligence reports. Paul had already deployed a wider net on Victor Braxton's known associates, but so far the leads were thin. Rebecca knew that, unless she found something concrete, something irrefutable, Braxton would remain beyond reach. She sipped bitter coffee and scrolled through the endless files when her desk phone rang. "Detective Tran," she answered, voice taut. The woman on the line spoke softly, with an edge of hesitation. "Acting detective, this is Elise Grant. I was Clara's assistant during her last films. I heard about the car. I've stayed quiet for too long." Rebecca leaned forward. Elise Grant had disappeared from the industry in the early '80s, retreating to a private life after Clara vanished. Her name had surfaced during the initial review of Clara's inner circle, but all attempts to contact her had failed. Until now. "M.H. Grant, thank you for calling." "Please, go on," Rebecca urged. There was a shaky breath on the line. "Back then, Clara confided in me. Not everything, she was careful, but enough to know she was scared. She'd found something that put her in danger." Elise paused, voice tightening. "If I'm gone, if no one hears from me, tell them to look in the old film vault at Lionheart." I never knew what she meant, but now maybe it's time. Rebecca's pulse quickened. "Do you know what she meant by the old vault?" Elise exhaled shakily. "There's a sub-basement beneath one of the original sound stages. Stage B. It was used to store raw footage, outtakes, and other things. The studio heads kept it quiet. Only trusted staff had access." Rebecca thanked her, heart-reaching. This was more than a lead, it was Clara's voice reaching across decades. Within the hour, Rebecca had secured a warrant and assembled a small task force. By midday, they stood before the aging facade of Lionheart Studios. The once glamorous complex now wore a faded veneer of modern upgrades. The old department had been less than cooperative, but the warrant left them no choice. A silent studio representative unlocked the rear access to Stage B, his expression carefully neutral. Rebecca led the way down a narrow service corridor, past peeling paint and rusted stairwells. The air grew colder as they descended into the bowels of the building. At the base of a concrete stairwell stood a thick steel door, its faded label barely legible. Paul Kim forced the lock with a hydraulic spreader, the metal groaning as it gave way. Beyond lay a vast, dimly lit chamber, rows of old film canisters stacked high against the walls. The scent of dust and celluloid filled the air. Rebecca's team moved methodically, cataloging and photographing the contents. At first, the vault seemed benign, reels of forgotten footage, discarded terminouts of materials. But as they advanced deeper, they found a locked cabinet marked private. With care, they pried it open. Inside, dozens of unmarked film reels lay neatly arranged. Their labels were crude, handwritten in faded ink. One read, "Test Reel A," another, "Casting Session, 1979. The title sent a chill through Rebecca's spine. They set up a portable projector on site. As the first reel flickered to life on the makeshift screen, silence fell over the team. The footage was grainy, the lighting amateurish. It showed young actresses, some barely older than teenagers, seated before the camera in what should have been benign screen tests. But the tone shifted quickly. The camera lingered too long. The questions became invasive. The poses forced. Rebecca's fists clenched as the reality of what she was seeing settled in. This was exploitation, filmed and archived in plain sight. Reel after reel revealed the same sickening pattern. Women promised opportunity, instead manipulated and recorded for purposes far beyond legitimate casting. Then Paul called out, "Detective, you need to see this one." He held up a reel labeled simply CV Final. Rebecca swallowed hard and nodded. They threaded it onto the projector. The film began with Clara seated in a familiar red silk robe. Her face was composed, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion and fear. The first moments mirrored the other reels, posed shots, controlled direction from an unseen man whose voice occasionally drifted into frame. But then the dynamic shifted. Midway through the reel, the camera wobbled, as if hastily repositioned. Clara leaned forward, her voice low and hurried. "If anyone finds this, if anyone watches this, know that I didn't agree to any of it." Her hands trembled visibly. "They think they can own us, use us, but I kept copies, I've hidden them, and if I'm gone, check the vault, check the ledgers. The truth is they're—" Rebecca's throat tightened. Clara had tried to leave a trail, one last desperate act to ensure her voice would not be silenced forever. The reel ended abruptly, the screen fading to black. The room remained silent, the weight of Clara's words sinking in. Paul finally spoke. She knew. She knew exactly what they were doing, and that they'd come for her. Rebecca's mind raced. If Clara had hidden more evidence, copies, ledgers, they had to find them. And now, with this footage, they had the first undeniable proof linking the studio's dark underbelly to Clara's disappearances. But even as they packed the reels for evidence transport, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The wolves were already circling, and somewhere, the man whose voice had echoed behind that camera still walked free. Rebecca Tran stood in the dimly lit conference room, her gaze fixed on the portable screen where the final frame of Clara's desperate message still lingered. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the projector fan winding down. Clara had known they would come for her, and now, decades later, her words echoed with a clarity that left no doubt. This was a conspiracy rooted deep within the heart of Lionheart Studios, and Victor Braxton had been at the center of it. As Rebecca packed up the reels for secure transport, her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. It was Dr. Nadia Malik. Rebecca answered immediately, her tone clipped. "What do you have?" Nadia's voice carried an undercurrent of urgency. "The DNA results just came through. The male hair from Clara's nightgown, full match to Victor Braxton." There's no doubt. He was there. Rebecca felt the world narrow around her for a beat. The single strand of hair had now become the linchpin of the case, a tangible connection placing Victor at the scene of Clara's final moments. She exhaled slowly, mind already racing through the next step. Secure the results. Triple encrypt the file. No one outside your lab sees this until I say so. Nadia responded with a terse. Turning to Paul Kim, who stood nearby packing up evidence, Rebecca relayed the breakthrough. Victor's DNA matches the hair. He was with Clara the night she vanished. Paul's eyes widened. "That's the nail in the coffin." Rebecca nodded, her voice firm. "We're not there yet. We need to show motive, connect the dots between the exploitation ring and Clara's death." Back at headquarters, the team worked around the clock. The recovered footage had already triggered a flurry of search warrants aimed at Lionheart's archived financial records. Through legal channels and quiet cooperation from disillusioned former staff, Rebecca secured access to a storage unit housing decades-old ledgers and internal memos once belonging to Lionheart's defunct accounting department. The documents arrived in battered file boxes, their contents yellowed with age. It was slow, painstaking work, page after brittle page of handwritten ledgers, expense reports, and cryptic notes. Rebecca worked alongside forensic accountant Sophia Ewan, a sharp-eyed analyst with a knife sifted through the sea of figures. At first, nothing overt stood out. Routine production costs, petty cash disbursements, vendor invoices. But then Sophia called out softly from across the table. "Detective, you need to see this." Rebecca moved swiftly to Sophia's side. Laid out before them was a small leather-bound ledger with no official studio branding. Its cover was unmarked, save for a faint set of initials, VB. Inside, the entries were terse and deliberately vague. Dates aligned roughly with the production timelines of several major Lionheart films, but alongside standard line items were others that sent a chill through Rebecca's spine. Consulting service, $275,000, 0 cents. Hospitality arrangements, $30,000, 0 cents. And standing stark among them, silence fee, VHF, $250,000, 0 cents. Rebecca traced her finger along the entry. "CV," she murmured. "Clara Vance." Sophia nodded grimly. "And look at the pattern. Prior entries show similar payouts, always following production dates, always linked to female performers." Rebecca scanned back through the ledger. The amounts varied, but the pattern was unmistakable. After each major film release, substantial sums had been quietly dispersed, presumably to actresses coerced into silence after being exploited. Rebecca's stomach turned. Victor wasn't just participating, he was orchestrating this, and Clara was the one who refused to be bought. The ledger told a damning story. While others had accepted payouts, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of necessity, Clara had chosen a different path. She had planned to expose them. The pending silence fee suggested Victor had known she was a risk, and when the payment had not gone through, the result had been murder. Rebecca photographed each relevant page meticulously, uploading encryptive copies to a secure drive. With the DNA match and now this financial trail, the case against Victor Braxton had gained formidable weight, but Rebecca knew caution was still paramount. The desperation would drive them to further acts of intimidation or worse. She convened her core team in a private briefing room to have the DNA match linking Victor to Clara's body. We have his financial records showing systemic hush payments tied to the exploitation ring, and we have footage of Clara identifying the existence of this conspiracy. We're building an airtight case, Paul added. Victor's travel logs confirm he was at his private estate the night Clara disappeared. The same estate where she was last seen alive. Rebecca's jaw tightened. We move fast, secure Victor's assets, monitor his movements. We can't risk him disappearing now that the net is closing. As the team dispersed to execute the next phase, Rebecca lingered alone in the briefing room. The image of Clara, brave, defiant, in the face of overwhelming power, flashed again in her mind. Clara had fought to bring the truth to light, even at the cost of her life. Now, it was Rebecca's turn to finish what she had started. Yet, as Rebecca reached for her phone to coordinate the next warrant, a new message flashed across her encrypted channel. It was from one of her deep-cover sources inside Lionheart's current legal department. The message was terse, but its implication sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through her veins. Braxton knows. He's moving assets, possible flight risk. Rebecca set the phone down slowly, her mind already pivoting. The fight was about to escalate, and Victor Braxton was not going down quietly. Rebecca Trant sat rigid in the driver's seat of her SUV, the message from her source at Lionheart burning in her mind. Victor Braxton was moving assets, likely preparing to flee. The case had gained momentum faster than she'd dared hope, but each step forward brought fresh peril. Victor was connected, ruthless, and aware that his long-buried sins were rising to the surface. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. This wasn't over, not yet. She needed one final link, one undeniable thread to ensure he would never escape justice. As the SUV cut through the rain-slicked streets of Vancouver, another thought gnawed at her. Elise Grant had mentioned that Claire had kept copies of her evidence, hidden away. And then there was the letter Claire had referenced in her filmed message. Ledgers, notebooks. Rebecca had already recovered the ledgers, but was there something more? An idea sparked. May Tran's house. Clara had been close to her aunt, Rebecca's grandmother. If Clara had trusted anyone outside the industry, it would have been her. And if she had hidden something personal, a final message, May's house would have been the place. Rebecca made the decision instantly. She called ahead to Paul Kim. I'm heading to my grandmother's. Keep Victor under surveillance and flag any sudden movements. Got it, Paul replied. Stay sharp. The old house sat quiet beneath the overcast sky. Rebecca let herself in with her key, the familiar scent of sandalwood and old books wrapping around her. May wasn't home, out at her weekly market trip as Rebecca had hoped. The house remained as it always was, a sanctuary untouched by the chaos swirling outside. Rebecca moved methodically through the rooms, eyes scanning shelves, drawers, and picture frames. The defaced photograph on the mantel manual remained, a grim reminder of the enemy's reach. Yet Clara's voice from the vault echoed louder in her mind now. I've hidden them, and if I'm gone. She paused in the small guest room at the back of the house where Clara had once stayed. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet. An instinct made her stop. The old hardwood near the bed looked slightly warped, one plank a fraction higher than the others. Rebecca knelt, fingertips tracing the seam. With a firm press and slight twist, the board gave way with a soft pop, revealing a narrow cavity beneath. Inside lay a single weathered shoebox, its lid secured with yellowed tape. Rebecca's pulse thundered as she carefully lifted it out and peeled the tape away. The box contained a few small keepsakes, a faded photograph of Clara, a delicate silver necklace with a star-shaped charm, and a sealed envelope marked in elegant handwriting. For my child. Rebecca's breath caught. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was aged but well preserved. Clara's handwriting flowed in elegant, hurried script. My darling, if you are reading this, it means I did not make it to tell you myself. I want you to know, first and always, that you were never a mistake. You were born of love and courage, though the world tried to twist that truth. The man who claimed to make me, Victor Braxton, is your father. He was once my mentor, but he sought to control me in ways I could no longer accept. When I discovered the ring, I knew I had to act. But by then I was carrying you. I had hoped to escape and raise you in freedom, away from their shadows. If I am gone, please find the truth and let it set us both free. With all my love, always Mama." Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she read and reread the words. Her breath came shallow, mind reeling. Victor Braxton was her biological father. Clara was her mother. All this time she had unknowingly walked the path Clara had begun. Her relentless drive to uncover the truth had not been coincidence. It was blood calling to blood. Rebecca sat for long moments on the floor, the letter clutched to her chest. Memories surged, her childhood questions about her origins, the adoption records that had always felt incomplete, the unspoken tension whenever she asked May about her birth parents. Now, at last, the answers lay before her. But confirmation was essential. Rebecca composed herself and called Nadia Malek. "Nadia, I need a discrete comparison, my DNA against Victor's profile. No record, no paper trail. Can you do it?" Nadia, sensing the weight in Rebecca's voice, replied without hesitation. "Yes, bring the sample." Later that evening, under the cover of routine lab work, Rebecca provided her sample. The waiting felt interminable. Days blurred into a haze of casework and restless nights, the letter's words seared into her mind. Finally, the call came. Nadia's voice was steady but grave. "Rebecca, it's a match. Paternal relationship confirmed 99.9%. Victor Braxton is your biological father." Rebecca stood in her office, the city's lights a blurred mosaic beyond the window. The truth settled upon her like a leaden cloak. The man she had hunted for Clara's justice was her own flesh and blood, a man whose crimes had shaped her very existence. Rage, sorrow, and grim resolve warred within her. She would not falter. Clara had fought to protect her, had died trying to bring the truth to light. Now Rebecca knew her purpose fully. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was personal, and Victor Braxton would face everything he had tried to bury. She turned back to the letter, her gaze fierce. "I will finish this, Mama," she whispered. "I promise." Rebecca Trant stood beneath the sterile glow of the briefing room lights, her expression carved from stone. The evidence board behind her now overflowed with connections. Victor's DNA match, the ledger, haunting video message, and the letter revealing the truth of Rebecca's own bloodline. Every thread pointed to one man, Victor Braxton. He had buried Clara, sought to erase the proof of his predation, and, for years, eluded justice. Now Rebecca would ensure he had nowhere left to hide. She faced her assembled team, voice unwavering. "We move on Braxton tonight. Intelligence suggests he's at his mountain estate in Whistler. The property is isolated, with private access roads and its own security detail. We go in with full authorization, no leaks, no errors nodded. The warrant had been secured, tactical units briefed." Rebecca had personally ensured that no part of the operation could be compromised by Braxton's network of influence. The weight of the last few days pressed on her, but so did a singular resolve. This was not only for Clara, but for herself, for the life her mother had tried to preserve. As the convoy of black SUVs wound through the snow-dusted forest roads toward the Braxton estate, Rebecca reviewed the intel one final time. Surveillance drones had confirmed movement within the property earlier that evening. They had to strike swiftly. The estate came into view, a sprawling glass and steel monstrosity perched atop a cliffside, its facade gleaming with cold opulence. The tactical team fanned out, weapons ready. Rebecca led the charge, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They breached the main entrance in a controlled explosion of splintered wood and alarm sirens. The interior was eerily silent. Rebecca moved with precision through marble halls and art-lashing rooms, each step bringing her closer to the confrontation she had envisioned for weeks. But Victor Braxton was gone. In the master's suite, an open safe stood empty. On the polished desk, they found a hastily discarded envelope containing a fresh Canadian passport under a false identity, flight itineraries, and a wad of euro notes. A scrawled note, almost taunting, read, "You can't catch a ghost." Security footage showed Victor slipping out through a concealed service exit barely an hour before the raid, aided by an unknown accomplice whose face remained obscured beneath a hood. The estate's extensive surveillance network had been wiped clean moments after Victor's escape. Rebecca stared at the vacant space where Victor should have stood, fury simmering beneath her controlled exterior. He was running, but now with fewer places left to go. "Lock down all borders. Issue an international warrant," she ordered. "He's desperate, and desperate men make mistakes." Over the next weeks, Interpol became an extension of Rebecca's hunt. Victor's properties were seized, bank accounts frozen, assets tracked. Yet he remained elusive, a ghost slipping through bureaucratic cracks. Rebecca pressed on, driven by the letter from Clara that she now carried with her always. She would not fail her mother, not now. Then came the call. 1 month after the Whistler raid, just as Vancouver's late spring thaw began to melt the remnants of winter, Rebecca's encrypted line buzzed to life. The voice on the other end belonged to Interpol liaison Marcus Keller, stationed in Zurich. "Detect Tran, we have him. Victor Braxton was apprehended at Zurich Airport this morning, attempting to board a private charter to Moscow. He was traveling under a false identity, but we verified biometrics. It's him." Rebecca exhaled, a tremor running through her. "Secure him. I'll be there." Within 48 hours, Victor was extradited to Canada under heavy guard. News of his capture spread like wildfire, igniting a media frenzy. The trial that followed was the most sensational Vancouver had witnessed in decades. Courtrooms overflowed, journalists camped on the courthouse steps. Survivors of Lionheart's abuse ring began coming forward, emboldened by the wave of exposure. Clara's footage, now authenticated and presented in evidence, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Rebecca prepared to testify, knowing that her moment on the stand would not only confront Victor, but reveal the truth of her own identity. The courtroom hushed as she took her place, the eyes of the niche upon her. The defense attorney wasted no time. "Detective Tran, is it true that recent DNA evidence confirms Victor Braxton is your biological father?" Rebecca met the gaze of the jury, voice steady. "Yes, the DNA analysis confirmed that Victor Braxton is my biological father. My mother was Clara Vance." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Rebecca continued, "My mother fought to expose a system of exploitation and abuse. She died trying to protect me and to reveal the truth. I am here to finish what she started." Victor sat stone-paced, the man who had once wielded unjust power now reduced to a figure of disgrace. The evidence was overwhelming. Letters detailing the hush payments, DNA linking him to Clara's body, footage of Clara's final message, all converged to strip away any veneer of innocence. After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts, including conspiracy, manslaughter, and obstruction of justice. The sentence, life imprisonment without parole. Rebecca watched as Victor was led away in chains, her heart heavy yet resolute. A shadow that had loomed over her life since before she was born had finally been cast down. In the quiet that followed the verdict, Rebecca visited Clara's modest grave beneath the swaying eucalyptus trees of Westwood Cemetery. She knelt, laying the silver star necklace upon the headstone. "I kept my promise, Mama," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I finished what you started." The wind stirred gently, carrying with it the faintest sense of peace. For Clara, for Rebecca, and for the truth that would never again be buried. If you found this story as haunting and gripping as we did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more mysteries uncovered through time. I'm curious, what part of this case shocked you the most? And where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. I'll be reading every one of them. Until next time, stay curious.